So what we're doing now is an open data panel. I'll be the panel lead, and I'll actually speak last as the panel lead and then be moderating with everyone else. But I'll actually invite to sit up at our very professional looking panel all of our panellists, and then we'll kick off. So if I can get, so Cassie Finlay from New South Wales Records. We've got Christopher Norman from the ACT government. We've got John Hillier from AGIMO, and Julian Carver from New Zealand as our 4 panellists. And I might ask Cassie to get up first and share with us what they're up to. Here we go. Boom, there you go. Do you want this one?
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I feel a little bit like a fish out of water because I'm an archivist at a Linux conference, but it's really great to be able to come and talk to you a bit about the open data projects that are happening at State Records New South Wales. And also I've got some updates from my colleagues in the New South Wales Government ICT policy area about what's happening in data.nsw, and they've got some things coming up, but I'll have to go back and refer to my computer to remind myself what those updates are, but I'll give you those later. So State Records is the state archives. We keep records of New South Wales Government from 1788 to the present day in the form of about 50 linear kilometres of hard copy records stored in Western Sydney. But we also now have a digital archives project, which is my job, is managing our digital archives initiative, which is about capturing and managing born digital records of government that have to be kept forever as state archives. But that's not enough for us. We thought, no, we want to do other stuff as well with our sort of small but perfectly formed team. So we started an open data project this was in about early 2011, which was all about making the really rich resource of archival metadata, catalogue information, available as open data. And so we started that project, as I said, early 2011 by releasing a few data sets, and then we, in mid-2011, we produced an API to our catalogue. What data does it provide, I hear you ask? It's basically the way we capture information about records of government requires us to be incredibly focused on changes to the machinery of government, to administrative changes. So we have the only repository of every single government agency that's existed in New South Wales and their name changes over time. You know, this is something that archivists have to deal with, is the record created by Agency X in 1972 is created by Agency Y in 2002. Same function, completely different agency, different establishing legislation, all that sort of stuff. How do you create continuity and linkages between that information? So our archival catalogue, as I said, is full of this information, and it's based around entities. So record series, which are collections of records, agencies, government functions, portfolios, people, and they're all linked together with many-to-many relationships. So it's actually, to use the API, the most popular use for it is search, for people doing research in the archives collection. But of course, what we would like is for people to actually make use of this data in creative and interesting ways, to actually make ways of seeing New South Wales over time, visualisations, you name it. So, sorry, I can't see this on my screen, so I'm just trying to find my cursor, which has disappeared. Where is it? Oh, there it is. Hooray. Okay, so I don't know, to demonstrate how varied our collection is in terms of the information we hold, just give me any noun, like a place or a thing, or an animal maybe, or any...
Opera.
Opera, okay. Yeah, that might be tricky, actually. So what the search technology produces, it uses the API to pull out the data on these various entities. So that's a good one, the plans of Sydney Opera House. And then if we wanted to produce that data in a different form, you can produce it as XML, in JSON, in a few other sort of super duper archival-y special formats as well for sharing between government archives. There's full documentation for the API to the archival catalogue available through our website or indeed on GitHub. The other project that I wanted to talk about is a newer one, which is called OpenGov New South Wales. This is, there was a site that used to be called Publications New South Wales, which was a place for New South Wales government to upload mainly annual reports. And we, the department that was responsible for it, sort of, the people that were working on it all went away and they didn't know what to do with it. So we said, oh, we'll take it. And we've now sort of refreshed the website and turned it into this, which is, it's still there for government agencies to add their annual reports so that there's a central place for over time government published information in the form of annual reports, strategic plans and so on, to relieve them of the burden of having all the older stuff on their website. But it's also going to be the place for agencies to upload their proactive records that they have to release under GIPA, our FOI proactive release legislation. So disclosure logs, pecuniary interests, policy documents and the like. So at present, the OpenGov has about 2,000 titles. Some of them are quite old, so we've got some annual reports that are sort of scanned documents going back into the 19th century. But there's also some quite contemporary content. And this site also has an API, which means that, and in fact we just migrated about the last 20 years worth of government gazettes into the site. So if you were so inclined, you could pull out full text from any of those government gazettes. I'll just have to see. So the API will permit you to do full text sort of all of these publications. Didn't mean to do that. Searching, using the data for whatever you might want to use it for. I think journalists potentially could be, you know, making a lot of use of this sort of information, particularly as the collection grows over time. I mean, one sort of issue, of course, is that government agencies do still love to publish things in PDF, and we are sort of trying to work with our kind of colleagues in our policy, whole of government policy area to talk to agencies about, well, how can we actually make GIPA information and other government information more available in better, more usable formats. But as I said, with this rather nifty document viewer and the full text, which even works for the scanned stuff, for the 1800 scan stuff, it's a bit dodgy sometimes because the fonts and the text is a bit hard to read, but you know, it's something that is worth a look. And the oh God, what have I done? Oh, I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom.
Scroll down the bottom?
Yeah. Thanks, Pia.
No, it's okay. Technical support is here.
Yeah. I was just going to click, keep going, just click on API. Cool. So the thing about this API is that it's quite new and is still being developed. So if you are so inclined to actually make use of any of this information or have an interest, we'd love to have your feedback on it. I think those are the main two things that I wanted to talk about. There's heaps of stuff happening in the archives, museums, library world in terms of open data. There's a lot of really interesting projects in our sort of sister and brother organisations. And so, you know, if you are interested, do, you know, chat to me afterwards about any of that. I think that's it. That's great. Thanks. Thank you. Cool.
That's fantastic. All right, what I might do is invite Christopher Norman up to present about what's happening in the ACT, and I'll just leave a pretty picture up.
Hi, my name's Christo Norman. I am working for the ACT government, and we've been working around over the last 12 to 18 months or so, trying to address this new conundrum, I guess, for us, open data. We started really addressing it about 12 to 18 months ago because our Chief Minister when she first came to office, said, you know, one of the things that I really believe in is that a government should be open and transparent, and that in an effort to do so, we need to release our data sets, we need to engage with the community more holistically, we need to be really working with the community to demonstrate how effective government actually is. And these are great words, but what we've found, well, I don't know, I'm guessing that when most people deal with government, ease of access, easy to engage with, open and transparent aren't usually the things that first come to mind. If you've ever tried to get data out of a government agency, quite often it's really difficult, and there can be a number of reasons for that. Even when the data is freely available, they might say, "Oh yeah, no, we've got that data. It's really easy. If you just go through to our budget papers, we've got it published there." Or it's in this 300-page PDF that you can just download. And what we've found is that as we've been trying to become more open and transparent, we've found that we need to start changing our own mindsets within government as to what open data is. And it needs to be more in line with what the community thinks open data is. Our idea of open data is publishing lots of information in formats that we're used to, which is typically as a report rather than data. So we haven't actually, or rather we're trying to make that transition from being looking at open data, from providing reports to providing open data. And in fact, I heard you talking earlier about PDFs being a common way of providing data. Well, we have exactly the same problem. So what we've done is we actually looked at what open data is and why you'd have open data. And really, we've got a few key reasons. One is because you want to hold the government to account, right? You want to be able to see what they're doing with the money that the taxpayers are investing in that government. You want it for a whole host of reasons. On a local level for the ACT government, developers might want it so that they can make a quid or to make life a bit easier for citizens. So providing bus timetable information, for example. Transparency, and a good example might be or for public health and safety reasons. So it's nice to know which restaurants have passed muster and which ones haven't in the past. So, there's a variety of reasons for it, and with that comes in, you get different sorts of people that are going to want the data as well. Journalists, developers, common everyday citizens that just want to find out something. And often when you want information, as a developer, often you'll have a great idea and you want to be able to access that data now. Having to go through an FOI, having to go through 6 channels within government often kills the idea dead. People don't want to do it, and then they lose the traction that their idea initially had with them. So in the ACT, what we said, oh gosh, okay, so the Chief Minister wants us to be more open, what do we do? Gosh, it seems that a lot of people around the world have created open data websites for jurisdictions. In Washington DC probably was one of the leading lights. They've got thousands, well over 1,000 data sets up on theirs now, which are regularly updated and available and all that sort of stuff. And we thought that perhaps we should do something similar. So we did. We created a Data ACT website, which released late last year, or mid to late last year. And it's got a few data sets on it. It doesn't have a lot, but the website itself, or the portal itself, is quite sophisticated. It allows any developer to hit the data sets on the website. You can hit it using web services. People can download the data in XML. They can create their own presentation layer on it, so you can do basic graphs, bring different data sets together. You can display it in geospatially, for example, on the website, and then you can embed the a graph directly into your own website. So we've been doing all this, but what we found is that technology isn't the problem. People are the problem. And they're not a problemers per se, because everyone's trying to work in the same direction under the guidance of government, but our attitudes are all different. So, for example, when I first started talking with a couple of agencies about being open and transparent, I remember walking into a meeting, and the first thing they did was that they had these 3 manuscripts that they plonked down on the table. Bang! We don't need to be any more open and transparent. We don't need to be providing any open data. We already do it. And clearly, what we need to be doing is launching upon an education program. What we found initially is that there's a number of reasons that come up against using open data websites. Cost, first of all. If an agency looks to providing data in a new way, they will talk about costs to the community, costs to themselves, and they'll say you can't do it. Often people will say it's not my job to provide this data. And another one, which is a bit rarer, but it still sometimes does come up, is that people are afraid that if they release data, people will find that they've done something wrong, which is, yep, that's true, and if we find something is wrong, we can fix it, right? In the US, in fact, something like that did happen, and it was reported to Obama by somebody researching things that government had wasted $3 billion doing things, and Obama's reaction wasn't to sack the bureaucrat that came up with the error, because that was pretty hard to find out who the bureaucrat actually was, but to say, thank you, we can actually use what you've done to save the government $3 billion. Here, we haven't, I don't think we're up to that level of maturity yet. We're still trying to get there. So, a number of reasons that people come out as to why they can't do things. So what are we doing about it? Well, we're trying to do a number of things internally within government at the moment, and we're going to be starting to do things externally over the course of the ensuing weeks as well. Internally though, what we're hoping to do is launch a community campaign program internally, which actually talks to all the owners of data and to get them to understand the value of their data, get them understanding how we should actually be measuring the value of data. And I think that's probably one of the major problems we've had. What's the value in open data? Certainly from within government, it's just seen as an impost. There's no value in it. So we need to flip it around and give them a sense of value for releasing data. We need to liberate data, essentially, is really where we're going. They're the main things that I really wanted to talk about. We will be doing other things over the ensuing months, hackathons, to get people starting to use our data. But really, what I'd like to encourage people to do is, if you ever want data from government, one of the greatest ways for data to become released is by the community itself, and that is to hit Twitter, to hit the government agencies, to hit your parliamentarians and say, guys, we need this data and we need it to be up to date. We don't want it to be stagnant. It needs to be published in easy to read formats. That's really something that needs to happen to actually create that momentum. And without that, I don't think that open data open data will actually stagnate without the actual developer community, the journalists and people like that actively lobbying government. So, thank you. I would have got about it.
Thank you. Wonderful, thank you very much. I'd like to now introduce John Hillier to have a bit of a chat. Thank you very much. You got it.
That way, thank you. Good afternoon, my name is John Hillier. I'm the Assistant Director of the ICT Policy Team in the Australian Government Information Management Office. A lot of you may think that that means we're not interested in open data, open government. Trust me, we are. My role in particular is to look after emerging technologies that are of interest to the whole of government and that the whole of government can benefit by the use thereof. Open data, open source, IPv6, all those sorts of things fall under my bailiwick. One of the things we're particularly interested in is big data analytics, how it can be of benefit to the government, and to that end we've spent the last 6 months researching big data, looking at what the industry has to offer in that space, and how government agencies that are either thinking of operating in that space or are already operating in that space are getting into it.
You keep going.
I'll keep going, okay. We understand that big data, if it's used to its most effective end, will actually lead to better government, and along the way that will lead to better and faster implementation of government policies, more targeted service delivery, increased productivity and operational effectiveness, and quite possibly, and this is something that the government is particularly, when I say the government I mean the Parliament is particularly interested in, reductions in expenditure. We see some of the opportunities in big data, the real-time management of the data that is out there, whether it be the structured data, which you people are all aware of, and particularly the unstructured stuff that most of you generate, whether it be about the government or for the government or about yourselves. It's the sort of stuff which government en masse is interested in. We see big data leading to personalised service delivery, and that will come down to, we believe, users' preferences, whether you're prepared to let agencies share information that they hold about you between them, or whether you just say, well, no, I don't want this information shared. The government has a responsibility to adhere to your wishes. Improved management of existing programs. There are lots of cases where program delivery goes slightly off the rails or has unintended consequences. With the better use of the data that's out there, we feel sure that we will be able to actually assist our policy deliverers with real-time information that will enable them to develop better and faster policies. Non-compliance and fraud, a very big issue for government agencies, particularly those in the service delivery side of the fence. And we see that big data and its analytics can assist no end in that area. Improving healthcare, service delivery to patients, patient outcomes is something else that the government is always interested in. And improved management of the infrastructure assets. If we can, as a government, manage the Australian infrastructure as a whole better, that means that as taxpayers we are all better off. There are, of course, the issues of privacy and security of data. We're well aware of them. We're actually in almost constant communication with the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner. We are looking at setting up a big data working group of government agencies, and the Information Commissioner is an integral part of that. As we develop our thinking in this space, we'll be looking to involve industry, academia, non-government organisations, and we hope that we will be able to develop a big data strategy that will assist government agencies, basically assist everyone in Australia. One of the other things we look at, or I look at, is open source. And for those of you that are interested in history, in 2007, GMO undertook a survey of government agencies and their use of open source. Thank you, Pia. The War Partners managed that process for us, and it was quite interesting. What we discovered was that while the agency executives didn't think they used open source at all, their technical staff knew that they did. So there was this huge disconnect between what the agency executives saw on the desktop and what was actually driving in the background. The government policy at that stage was one of what we called informed neutrality, which basically meant that we didn't know and we weren't actively considering open source software. That policy was reviewed in 2010, and in 2011 we released the new open source policy that stated that open source was to be considered whenever agencies undertook procurement measures that involved software. Since that time, we've instigated a compliance program where I log into AusTender, or AusTender comes up on my desktop probably about 20 times a day with every tender that uses the word software or ICT or a whole range of other keywords. I read those tenders, and if I think that they involve the procurement of software and they don't mention the open source software policy, I contact the procurement officer involved and remind them of their obligations. I can say quite honestly that as far as I'm concerned and as far as the GMO is concerned, there is not one ICT tender that is released that involves the procurement of software for government agencies that does not invoke the open source software policy. That policy basically states that if you go to the market for a software solution, you must consider an open source solution. You must let the market know that you're open to open source solutions. The market, in their responses, has an obligation to put forward an open source solution if one's available. If it's not, they have to notify the agency that there isn't, as far as they are aware, any open source solution that will fit their particular business requirement. AGMO has also undertaken a government solutions register. We did this in 2011 as part of the open source software and COTS-GOTS programs. That was a survey of agencies' use of software solutions, and we came across some fairly interesting information. In 2011, 71% of agencies told us that they used at least one open source software solution. That figure dropped to 63% in 2012. Upon closer examination, we figured that it was actually because agencies better understood what an open source solution was. They weren't actually saying that Google Maps was an open source solution anymore. To us, that was a good thing. We continue to work with agencies to make sure they comply with both the COTS-GOTS policy and the open source software policy. And finally, I've managed the whole of government transition to IPv6 over the last 5 or 6 years. God, it seems a lifetime. That transition for the whole of government was due to be completed by the end of 2012, and in November we asked agencies two very specific questions. A, would you be ready by the end of 2012, and if not, when you would be? While I'm still chasing only about half a dozen recalcitrant agencies for their response to those two questions, it seems at the moment that just under half of all government agencies have already enabled an IPv6 capability on their external facing systems. What that means is that their client, whether it be citizen or industry, chooses the protocol with which to communicate to the agency. The agencies have developed dual stack solutions, so if the client chooses to use v4 to communicate, it will go down the v4 stack. If they use v6, it will go down the v6 stack, and the response comes back the same way. So the client gets to choose the way that they interact with government. Of the remaining agencies, more than 40% of them will have this v6 capability up by the end of the first quarter. And that will mean that at least 80% of the government's ICT capability will be v6 capable by the end of Q1 this year. The rest of the agencies have told us they will have that capability up and running, most of them by the end of Q2, and there are some stragglers that are running into Q3 of this year. That process means that the Australian government basically leads the world in its transition to IPv6. Along the way, we've driven industry a little bit faster than industry would have liked, and we see IPv6 as being the great enabler for open communication between the citizens and its government wherever they are. Thank you.
And it's also just worth mentioning that a couple of years ago when Jeff Houston was a keynote speaker at LCA, and I asked him what he thought about our IPv6 strategy, he said, it's the best in the world, but it's not going to save us. Typical, he's such an optimist. Anyway, I'll pass on to Julian from New Zealand. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pia. Hi, everyone. I'm Julian Carver, as Pia says, from New Zealand, specifically Christchurch. Spent just recently 14 months as the Establishment Chief Information Officer for the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority, and also in 2011 co-led the development of New Zealand's Declaration on Open and Transparent Government. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that, give you some examples of the reuse of government data, and tell you a little bit about how we made it work and what you can do here in your open data kind of advocacy and initiatives. So New Zealand Declaration on Open and Transparent Government directs government agencies, so central government, local government, and Crown owned enterprises, state-owned enterprises, to undertake an active program of release of high-value non-personal data for reuse. One of the big things that made that viable, has made it effective, was making it compulsory. So there's a certain degree you can get along with the early adopters, there's a certain degree to which you actually have to make it happen. We were fortunate enough to have a Minister of Finance who is quite an analytical guy and who really pushed hard and supported the activist community and the people inside government who were pushing for open data. So that program's been in place for over a year now, and there's a whole lot of examples. I'll talk through 4 of them in particular. So we have a charities register. When they redeveloped the charities register, they baked open data in, created a set of APIs that records, the charities register records data on 25,000 charities, and that's all available through an API now. That's being used by things like Student Job Search. So when charities register for to get volunteers, it checks whether they are a registered charity. It's being used by internal applications in philanthropic trusts in order to understand what charities are doing what work where and where the gaps are, and so they can target their giving. And it's been used by activists to be able to uncover some of the impacts in quite immediate terms of cuts to government services in particular areas. It's also ASB Property Guide. So this is an application that a bank has created, augmented reality app, so you can go and look at a house that's for sale and it will pull up the capital value, the details of that listing, a whole lot of other data to make it easy to look for properties. It's a service called InfoConnect, which is transport data from right across New Zealand. That now has 12 apps that are using that data, some of them web apps, 6 of them mobile apps, a couple from Automobile Association, a number of private third-party apps that people are selling for money that let you look at road closure data, traffic delays in real time, and look at traffic images from traffic cameras from all around the country. One of the really interesting uses of that data was another app called the ANZ Truckometer. ANZ is a bank, I'm sure you know. They used the traffic data in order to determine that traffic flows gave about a 6-month pretty accurate lead time on economic growth or decline at a regionally really specific level. So that's a bit like John's big data. Big data is analysing data from a whole lot of sources to find patterns that you didn't know were there, that you didn't necessarily suspect, to give you answers that can inform public policy. That gives better targeted intervention for agencies. It gives confidence for ANZ customers because they know that their bank's looking at useful data and understanding how things are happening. So, how did we make this happen? From an outside of government perspective, the most effective thing that we found we were able to do was to embarrass government. So we built an open data catalogue and said, government, you need one of these. And they went, yeah, maybe we do. And the open data community helped government to do that. One of the most effective things we've done with that data catalogue, data.gov.nz, the official one, was enabling people to ask for data. Because how do you know what data to release as an agency? The conversations inside government were all, well, this open data thing sounds good, but how do we know what to release? It's so much and it's expensive. And so the best thing you can do is enable the users, the potential users of the data, to tell you what data they want. So our data request, data.gov.nz has a request register. You can go on, you can ask for data sets, you can vote on what data sets you want to see. And agencies are required to respond to those requests. So there's somebody in our Department of Internal Affairs who looks after data.gov.nz that processes those requests, gets in touch with the agency, says, have you got this? Can you release it? And then posts the record of that conversation on data.gov.nz. So that's number one. Number two, make it compulsory. And number three, support agencies. So I, in the beginning of December, was over in Australia, met with some people at various conferences. One particular state, I won't name which state it is, someone very senior in government said, we're embarking on a big open data initiative. I've just got a quote for $250K a year for a petabyte of data storage. Do you think that's a good deal? And I was being polite, so I didn't say that's entirely in the wrong category of question to be asking. If you make a big bucket and ask agencies to put the data in it, then you're going to get a pile of data that isn't up to date, usable, reusable, that people can trust. So what we've found is the most important thing is providing real hands-on support to agencies as they work through releasing data. So if you are in an agency and you want to draw on some of the stuff we've done, ict.gov.nz, there's a whole lot of guidelines, guidance, things like helping agencies prioritise data for release, how to deal with open access licensing, protect privacy, all of that stuff. Make that a shared resource that everybody in government builds on and, use our experience. We drew a lot from Australia's experience, in particular Senator Kate Lundy and Pia Waugh in our early days in open government, and we've raced ahead in the open data space, so you should feel free to take from us. One of the things we learned in the earthquake recovery context was the way that you get stuff done in a disaster is quite different from the constraints on doing things in peacetime. And that seems kind of crazy. The big thing that changed was people were willing to accept risk. People were willing to make mistakes. And in government, people are really, really scared of making big mistakes. I only know two ways of avoiding big mistakes. Either you're perfect, or you make lots of little mistakes. So creating a culture in government where it's okay to make lots of little mistakes, to release early, release often, to try stuff out and get feedback, I think is a way forward. So a challenge to everybody here, our data.gov.nz has 2,250 data sets. If we add up data.gov.au and your state governments, you get to 1,500. So we're ahead of you guys, and your population's 4 or 5 times the size of ours. It's a pretty rough and rude measure, and it's rude of me to say that we're ahead, but hey, some competition sometimes is a good thing. So how do you folks who are sitting in the audience get that number up, get awesome things built with government data? Number one, as some of the other panellists have said, ask agencies for their data and just keep asking, and be really annoying and ring them up and tweet about it, and if there's a request register, put it on there, and ask your MPs if you're not getting joy from the agencies. So number one, ask for the data, build things using the data, create useful services, whether they be economic, services you're making money on, whether they're social or environmental entrepreneurism. And if you're working on projects, any kind of ICT system, software system for an agency, demand that APIs that enable open data are baked in. We shouldn't be building systems and services without that anyway. So demand those things. Thank you.
Broken. And I might just add to that considering Australia only had its first actual open data platform, which was the ACT, hurrah, effectively only 4 or 5 months ago, and there's only a couple of other ones popping. We've been working under a handicap, so the fact that we've got that many published with that handicap, you better watch out, because over the next year we're probably going to overtake you again. Yeah, we should absolutely be punching above our weight in this stuff. And I'll also just say, just very quickly, as I mentioned before, I'll be working on data.gov.au and trying to fix that problem, so watch that space. So that's all I'll say though. We only sort of have like 10 minutes now for questions, so let's very quickly. Any questions? Oh, come on, people. Yes, yes.
Hi, so you just said, oh, it's the platforms, but I spent 4 years trying to get the permission to reproduce the bus timetable.
Yes.
And which ended with, it was political issues.
Yeah. No, it's
so
true.
What do we do about the data that's already, on the internet? Open data hackers want to get to it, but, you can't publish that stuff because you might get sued. And as a side note, I get nasty emails from low-level employees in departments where I've done those things.
Yeah.
So how do we change this culture of, if usually you don't download an MP3, you don't download a car, but how do we have this culture where you can download a government website and give it to someone or put it on a cake?
Well, with 3D printing, we can download a car. I think actually the answer to that is being, part of the answer to that is actually being able to quote back at them their obligations. So if they have an obligation to publish under Creative Commons by default, which is a federal government thing, not all of the states have that, but in federal government data, if it's published under something else, like basically saying, here's the thing that says, here's the Attorney General Department's, Principal of IP's statement that says this here, why is this not published under this? As opposed to, can't we just have it, sort of thing. But I mean, that's hard as well, but let's come up with a strategy for that. That's not one we can answer, I think, very quickly in a panel. But panel, what do you reckon? To the microphone, please.
It's a really good question. It is cultural. It's not technical, because often the systems that are underpinning it can do what you want. There's a natural propensity to hold things closer to your chest rather than to expose yourself to the whole world. I think that's a general human nature, and that's something that government needs to contend with. So talking about Creative Commons and digital by default, really focusing on that is really the right steps. But I think it comes down to making the government accountable. At the moment, we see citizens, and I'm being very broad in the we, as people that we're servicing. We don't actually necessarily see them as investors that are trying to get at the information to make their lives, to really extract the full value out of the investment that they have put into government. Through their tax dollars, through their education, and the way that they can contribute to society. So I think there's a flip within government that needs to occur, and it is occurring, but it doesn't happen overnight. But it will happen.
Anyone else want to say anything as a panellist? Okay, question?
Hello, I'm actually from the media. I'm a journalist, which is, I think, the thing that people are most afraid of, well, governments are most afraid of with open data. I wondered, look, because we are looking for the negative in order to create change in the government, how has that sort of been addressed within the ACT, who's trying to do best practice, and also New Zealand, who have already spent a little bit of time in this space and have been more open?
Sure. Expense scandals are a really good example. By holding MPs' expenses or government chief executive expenses secret, not releasing them, we've ended up with every few years a very large Official Information Act request from a number of media agencies, and then that all gets bundled up and it all gets scrutinised, and there's this huge fight. Now we just release those every month, and it's incredibly boring to everybody. So releasing early and releasing often can often diffuse those major political challenges, but it also gives the media, from our perspective, the opportunity to perform a really useful function in terms of scrutinising government performance, scrutinising especially the way that money is spent, in order that money can be spent well and that public debate on particular issues is held, is had. So I think media scrutiny is a good thing, and I think more data helps journalism be evidence-based, just like helping policy be evidence-based.
Hmm.
Can I just chime in on that? I think one of the
Microphone.
Hi, I think one of the things that I think was touched upon in an earlier panel as well is that it's not just the media, but then the public jumps on what the media puts out there. And in the open source space, we're kind of used to the idea of rapid prototyping and fail early and fail often to produce outcomes. And if the media spin it as waste of taxpayer funding because we're funding all these projects that don't have outcomes or tangible outcomes, as opposed to this is the best, most cost-effective process to get to a lean outcome, ultimately where we figure out what does and doesn't work, and then we most efficiently produce a really good outcome, then they're less likely to react in that way. Of course, it's easy for media to jump on the sensational waste of taxpayer money, you know, snouts in the trough or whatever. So it's really critical that people understand the technology, understand the kind of things that we do if we're in this space, and how that's actually enabling efficiencies rather than actually just spending money for no apparent outcome. So if you could do that, that'd be awesome. Thanks.
On behalf of all media, everywhere, please. No.
I'd add to that too that one of the challenges that I see is the media is good at finding fault and pointing there and saying, hey, you guys, you need to fix it, this is your problem. And that's fine and appropriate, but so too is applauding courage and releasing data sets which potentially are going to hurt you, the individual, just as much as the organisation or the section or the department, takes courage. And all too often I see people will use that open data to find flaws and then to attack that department. If you're that department, why would you release that data? So, just a comment.
And there's also, it's worth noting that I don't have the stats exactly right, but in terms of freedom of information requests, which of course, predates open proactive data publishing, but it's an interesting lesson. A huge amount of those requests come from the media, and when there was a legislative change which basically said that freedom of information request responses would be published publicly for a matter of transparency, we have the problem now where some media will turn around and say, well, if you give it to us and then publish it at the same time, then, you know, nasty things will happen. And I find that really curious, because it's like, well, you can't, you know, ask, you know, I understand wanting to get the story, but at the same time, by having the data, the information request out publicly will actually help keep your story, like give other people the opportunity to actually verify your story, which is a good thing, surely, in terms of transparency and openness.
I can talk about that directly.
Oh,
yes, it, really, the media requires a lag time. So it's not that we don't want all of that information to be available. It's that when you've gone through the FOI process, which often takes months, and often, like, say on average about 6 months if the data's any good, it means that it might take you more than a week to be able to fine-tune the story out of that.
Sure.
And if your rival has already jumped on top of that, pulled the little pieces out of that, or which actually often happens, government departments hand it directly to your competitor, and feed them what they think, the spin on the story. That's the problem.
That's interesting as well. I hadn't heard of that.
You know, that's what happens. That's why journalists get upset about it being released to the public on the same day they get it.
So maybe the compromise is to have the data published to the public at the same time the story goes live, because one of the things I think that we should try to encourage is that when people hear a statement or a policy or whatever, they should be able to go and check the data simultaneously, because they're not going to remember to do it tomorrow or whatever. So maybe that's happy compromise, because I've heard, I'll just give a very quick case study and then we're going to have to shift to the next panel. But there was a story a couple of years ago where the Minister of Health at the time basically announced that they'd done this huge analysis of the Medicare data, right? And they'd basically been able to determine that health services around the country were disproportionate in terms of, you know, and we're being charged differently. And I think in the ACT, one particular specialist group was charging 25% or 20% more than the rest of the country's average, which was huge. That particular group of specialists came out with a public statement saying, well, we've done a survey of our members and we disagree. Now, of course, what's happened is people see politician versus doctor and they're going to believe the doctor. If at the same time that the announcement had been made, the properly anonymised Medicare data had been made public, then people could actually check it for themselves at the same time. So in a way, publishing data is actually the way to build trust and the way to actually back up a statement. So I don't know. Anyway, any last statements from the panel? Because we're going to have to move to the next panel. Yes, please.
I have my messages from...
oh, please. Do you want to stand up here?
Oh, no.
Okay.
I'll just... So this is just from the... ICT policy area of the New South Wales government, who, when I kind of randomly got in touch last week, said, oh, you'll be at Linux 2013, please let them know certain things.
That's lovely.
First of all, Apps for New South Wales open data competition with a community education theme. There's a hackathon developer weekend in Sydney on February 23 and 24. New data will be released for the competition, cash and mentoring as prizes. And the hackathon's being held on International Open Data Day.
Yay!
February is Open Data Month for New South Wales Government. There are also plans underway for release of real-time rail data in February. That's basically it. Go to data.nsw.gov.au for more information.
Brilliant. Data.nsw.gov.au for more information. I think we'll wrap up there. Thank you very much to our panellists.